Thanks, everyone. Really excited to be here. I was extremely excited to see the cypherpunk ethos coming back to this industry. A lot of us got here and started in this industry because we were worried about the internet, we were worried about privacy, we were worried about security, and we saw this industry as a way to build a dramatically better internet infrastructure. And I personally am extremely tired of the stupid casino culture that has been going on for the last few years. The entire thing has been co-opted by short-termist oriented pump and dump type behavior. Even if it's not an outright pump and dump, it's functionally a 2 to 4 year pump and dump bullshit. And I personally want to get the entire ecosystem back into the roots of where we came from and the technologies that are critical for the future of the world and the future of our species. So this talk is about that. It's about critical problems that we have to solve. I'm going to give a view first at Web3 and securing the internet communication stack. And I'll talk about preventing Orwellian states and talk about specific communications where we need to focus. And then if there's time with it, I know that the event's running a little bit late, so I'm going to see if I can try and compress it a little bit to get us back on track. If there's time, I want to give a view into what's coming ahead in the next 10 years, meaning the world's changed a lot in the last 10 years, and the next 10 years are going to change even more. So the criticality of the work that we're doing here is enormous, and it is way, way larger than what I think most people in this industry realize. So let's go into Web3 and securing the internet. A lot of us got here because we saw Web3 as a dramatic improvement on the web that was there before. We wanted to add verifiability to the transactions to introduce trust into the stack, to introduce trust in the transactions that we have and in our communications. A lot of us organize around these kinds of values: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, users owning and controlling their data, being able to make all interactions verifiable, reader and writer privacy, dependable, trustless, and robust infrastructure, self-sovereign identity, and more. I'm sure that all of you can imagine a number of rights that you would like to have and you would like to bake into the internet that are not listed here. It'd be very useful for the whole ecosystem to coalesce around a set of rights that we want to establish and connect those explicitly to specific systems that we need to build and specific roadmaps to get there, so that all of us can orient and have a very direct year-over-year check-in with how we're doing as an industry and advancing into this landscape. For the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of my time focusing on these kinds of systems. Now, one of the things that brought me first into this industry is the fact that you can use the existing incentive structure of this kind of technology to make a whole sweeping upgrade to how the infrastructure emerges, meaning you can swap what is normally contracts in terms of service and corporations and courts and nation-state policy for math, cryptography, and economics. And if you can do that, you can build a much more robust foundation for digital interactions. So think of that as creating a global, public, international digital utility upon which you can bake in digital human rights directly into the bottom of the stack. And so that's, in a sense, the goal for a lot of us. There's a bunch of projects around all of these ecosystems that are working in these directions, but right now we're so uncoordinated that I think there's an enormous amount of waste. I was thinking in the last few months that probably 90% of what, somewhere between 70 and 90% of what all teams do in our industry is duplicative, wasteful work across the board because we're not coordinating better. And we're supposed to have the best coordination tech in the world, so what the hell are we doing? We need to dramatically improve the coordination landscape to be able to achieve these kinds of roadmaps. So think of the internet and the superpowers that you have. Think of the massive supercomputer that you have in your pocket. Think of all of your life today is primarily mediated by these things and the internet infrastructure that you're connecting to. Imagine that you lost access to this, or that some policy targeted your group of people specifically, and that you were in some list that was not allowed to be able to use certain infrastructure. Imagine how the world would change for you overnight. Unfortunately, that's what's possible now. That kind of mass surveillance and Orwellian digital totalitarianism is possible. The tech that we've built over the last 20 years around the world has enabled this. This hasn't quite happened yet. We have lots of examples of where things could go really bad, but this kind of extreme totalitarian type of thing has not happened yet. But the tech is there for it. I often look back in 1984 as a very, very, very tame perception of what the world could be. You have a TV that can spy on you with a camera. Guess what? All of us carry somewhere between 4 and 8 cameras now everywhere we go. There's cameras everywhere in the ecosystem, everywhere around. Like, I don't know how many cameras right now are in this room pointed at all of us. It's trivial to take all of that face rec and connect it to incentive structures that cause certain compliance and control. So the level of power that totalitarian states can have today is completely unprecedented. And that's not saying anything of the type of AI systems that are emerging. So I've often toyed with the idea of writing a 2024 book of like just looking at the technology today and how it could be used in this way. Maybe that's an info hazard. Maybe I shouldn't give anybody bad ideas. But man, is this absolutely worrisome. So I'll talk briefly about these modern orwellian states, how to prevent them, and how to secure our communications against them. So just think of, try to like get out of your day-to-day environment and just think about the number of devices, the number of applications, the connectivity. Think of the telecommunications infrastructure that we've built. Think of the AI models that we have now. Think about how you could connect those to certain kinds of incentive structures. Think of being able to have, general GPS position, AV connectivity, communications data, health data, all kinds of social media control. This is a drastically bad place to start from. We've seen, in the last US election, we saw the last one, maybe the one before that, we saw the rise of Cambridge Analytica and thankfully fall of Cambridge Analytica. But you can bet that there exists a bunch of these kinds of institutions going on right now, just way less visible. And so this stuff is happening in the background. You can use these kinds of systems with population control loops. Think of systems control theory, game theory, to orient entire groups of people in various directions. And guess what? We now have starting to solve the bottleneck in software for robotics. So we're starting to build robotics fleets. So we have like the really cute robotic dog. Awesome. It'd be terrible if that thing was chasing me down the street. We have things like drones. Tiny little drones that could be used for all kinds of surveillance or social control. So the capability stack that we've built over the last 20 years is like the most amazing dream for the dictators of the 20th century. Just imagine the worst possible dictators that you can think of in history, and just imagine them just looking at the technology stack, salivating for the level of power and control that they could have. So we are not necessarily beyond this kind of outcome. And this is possible. So we need to do what we can together to prevent the rise of these kinds of systems and make sure that, first of all, these kinds of states do not emerge. There's a lot that we can do as a society to prevent the rise of these kinds of systems. But more specifically, we can change and upgrade the infrastructure to prevent that kind of abuse. So this breaks down into whole ranges of tracks. So think of being able to educate the public, being able to establish better policy and government, being able to secure the technology stack, being able to have stronger economies that prevent the rise of this. Think of all of the work that we've done over the last few decades on improving policy landscape. There was the crypto war at some point. The crypto wars were, cryptography was a munition at some point. You couldn't just export cryptography. Thankfully, we won that thanks to a lot of political action by a lot of parties. But think of the next generation version of those kinds of things. So I'm going to spend the rest of the Orwellian states piece here talking about securing communications, because I think that's the fundamental primitive that we need. Everything else follows from that. So think of securing the routing stack. So few groups here focus on securing the lowest layer of the network. Most blockchains today are perceived to be uncensorable or perceived to be untakedownable. Absolutely not true. You can take down any single blockchain today. If you're a sophisticated attacker, if you know the network and you know how it works, it is not that expensive to take down the current networks. It's just that today, the game theory and the incentives show that you can just make more money with them than to attack them. But if a sophisticated attacker wanted to shut these things down, they absolutely could. It is within our power to get out of that, but we need to make very specific types of upgrades to the stack. Think about naming infrastructures. Decentralized naming, we have kind of decentralized naming, but we cannot use that in the underlying stack. So it's trivial to attack all of our naming systems. And then you can't access, suddenly all your mobile apps break, suddenly all your websites break, you're dead in the water. We're still using the fairly broken CA system. We've made a bunch of improvements along the years, but we're still using the CA system with the ability to forge all kinds of certificates all over the place. We have the technology now. We've built that over the last 10 years to improve this stack. This is where we should focus. We've built a decentralized web structure. A bunch of us have spent a lot of time building content addressing in a peer-to-peer infrastructure for how to route websites and applications and so on. And there's a whole range of roadmap type things that we need to do to get it to the point where you can use it on a day-to-day basis. We need to take that sort of approach to all kinds of things. Today, when you try to use any blockchain, you go through a bunch of front ends. Most of them are mobile applications that are delivered through high centralized control. A few of them are delivered through browsers, and a fewer still are delivered through uncensorable stacks. So really shift the entire direction towards this kind of thing. Browsers. Today, it's great to have a range of other browser tech that can improve our access to these systems. But in general, these are not widely adopted by most mainstream people yet, and we need to give a very strong push in this direction so that we have a dramatically better underlying browser stack that respects rights and privacy. The big one for me is app stores. I was very worried about how were we going to be able to shift the structure here to make sure that app stores stop being this linchpin of control. Because you could do all of what you want on the internet infrastructure stack, but if you don't fix the underlying app store, you cannot change the applications that people get. Most of our activity now is mediated by smartphones. So it's basically two corporations and their stacks that control the way that most people around the planet connect with these things. Most governments that are disconnected from the US and try to choose different things still use some of the variants from these things. Like Android is basically everywhere. So the way in which we structure and operate the app stores and what we force to be norms in the app store layer is what defines how the rest of the stack ends up operating in mobile. It'd be great to get better, more decentralization in the handset manufacturer scale, but that's extremely difficult. You need a massive cash flow for that. And second, it'd be great to, at the very least, open up the app stores. The good news here is that, again, through great policy work, we got a huge opening here. The EU now is forcing Apple and Android to open up the App Store so you can download entire new app stores. That is a massive win for privacy and security on the internet. We need to extend that kind of structure to the rest of the world so that anybody can build an app store and you can build a much better pathway for other applications to ride through that. So you can't just get banned because the App Store controller doesn't agree with how you do things. We also need to secure our basic communications. One-to-one connectivity, one-to-many, many-to-one, many-to-many. All of this sort of stuff today is super owned. It's great to see more people using things like Signal. It's great to see that trajectory. But in reality, most of these systems are fairly easy to surveil and fairly easy to control and fairly easy to take down. Any sophisticated attacker would be able to shut down a bunch of these systems. So two things matter here. One is get your things adopted by the mainstream so that it becomes intractable for groups to attack them and bring them down. But even then, it's critical to build in infrastructure that is extremely difficult to circumvent. So I think today, what the crypto industry and the Web3 industry should be focusing on is social network type tech, building better connectivity tools, better ways of organizing. It's crazy that we still use Telegram as our normal dominant form of communication today. That's not a good life plan. And to be clear, none of us know the Telegram outlook, and it's very likely that they're trying really hard to create a proper and secure system, but because the thing is not open source fully, you cannot trust it. So for the folks that really love Telegram, and by the way, I'm an avid Telegram user, for the folks that use Telegram, there's a very straightforward path to securing the Telegram entire communication stack, and that's open sourcing the whole stack completely and having alternative servers. We need to be able to push the entire Telegram stack and the entire Signal stack and all of those things to fully open source environments where you can run different alternate systems and you can use formal verification to show that it's not actually owned somewhere. And so that's where we need to shift all our communications to. It'd be great to get even better secure communications hardware right into the hardware itself. This is dramatically harder, and we need very large cash flows to do it. The good news here is that the crypto industry now controls somewhere on the 1 to 2 trillion scale of capital. But we need about an order of magnitude more before we can really start doing this. So maybe this becomes possible for us in 2 to 5 years, and that would be amazing to see. But this is fairly difficult. A better thing that might work attractively is to force policy landscape to ensure certain kinds of connectivity follows certain patterns. Ultimately, so much of the future depends on great research and development, doing the science to figure out what are the right cryptographic methods, what are the right tools, and then, crucially, to translate those different ideas into concrete technologies that can be put into systems. So many better secure communication systems have been invented. Very few of them are in wide use. And that's a bottleneck problem. We have an ideas to technology to products bottleneck. And so more activity translating that, I think, would be extremely good. I'm a huge fan of zero-knowledge proofs, multi-party computation, and fully homomorphic encryption. The scaling laws there are really nice. It shows that in 5, 10, 20 years, all of this stuff is going to be perfectly tractable to run a lot of our communication stack. And so that's really cool. More of the ZK world should be focused on securing the communication stack than just trying to just scale transactions. Scalability has been a big problem, but we've solved a lot of it, and it's going to get solved in the next few years fully. Now more of the ZK people should be transitioning to fully secure communications. And I think FHE is really the end game there. FHE is going to give you the ability to communicate at large with security and privacy, and it's not that far away. FHE was 20 years away 15 years ago, right? So we're actually quite close to being able to deploy large-scale FHE systems. Already today, we have FHE being used in the crypto industry for all kinds of transactions. Doing that for communications is not that far behind. Ultimately, what's critical about this industry is that it routes the capital that we're harnessing less towards the casino culture and more towards the fundamental R&D development in this infrastructure. We need to get more of the cash flows that we have routing into these R&D processes. And we can do that through public goods funding. The Gitcoin community, all the drips, all kinds of innovations have been built in the last 2 to 3 years to route large-scale capital to public goods. Think of RetroPGF. That's funding so much Ethereum infrastructure now. We need to weave that kind of stuff into the earlier parts of the R&D pipeline, especially oriented towards this kind of security. So if we do the roadmap work, and if we talk to all of the networks and all of the DAOs to route PGF funding in this direction, we can maybe solve this problem. So overall, we've made an enormous amount of progress in the last decades. We have really great production-grade infrastructure and software, but it can be used for really bad things, and we need to turn the innovation cycle in our benefit to secure the infrastructure. And we have a long way to go to be fully Orwellian proof. And a lot of us got into this industry for that reason. We want to establish these digital human rights, and it's up to us to do this work. Other people won't do it. It's not other people that are magically sitting somewhere that are just going to make the world better for you. It's people in this room and people in rooms like this in our industry. It's basically up to us. So it's up to you whether we get this outcome or not. So now I wanted to give you a glimpse. I spent a lot of my time thinking about the future, and I want to give you a glimpse of the things that are coming in the next 10 years. I already touched on a couple of them, but I want you to kind of like zoom out of the normal crypto industry and the day-to-day applications and just think 3, 5, 10 years ahead. And again, predicting the future is fairly difficult. Things that seem probable now is a much more narrow cone than what's actually probable or plausible. And in that large span of possibility, we want to be able to orient the trajectory of technology development and product adoption to end up in some preferable landscape. And this is how you can get good things. I think this is the most important graph for humanity. This plots computational complexity with time. And we are seeing that in the next 20 years, depending on the granularity of your model, we can have the level of computational capacity required to fully emulate a human brain. That's kind of crazy. Most people, 10, 20 years ago would think that this is centuries away. That's also what they said about AGI and ASI, and that's now around the corner. So my perspective on this graph is that AGI and ASI are around the corner, somewhere between 5 to 15 years, maybe 20 years in the outer scale, but we effectively have AI systems that will be as smart as humans in every task. Once you unlock the AI recursive improvement loop, that's really going to put us on a path to ASI very quickly. And this also means that if you can simulate an entire human, you can certainly do connectivity to the brains very directly. So it opens the door for BCI. We've seen AI accelerate dramatically as a field. We saw a set of results, and as soon as we got AlexNet and a few other, the Cat Faces paper, suddenly the entire field understood that this stuff was actually quite more capable, and we saw a massive pouring of capital into it, and we saw a huge acceleration in the curve. So the curve of AI development was increasing at a certain rate. As soon as it was clear that certain successes were possible sooner, we reoriented our capital output, and suddenly we got a different step change in the curve. Now we're taking the outputs of those systems and embedding them everywhere in our economies, and we're now orienting lots of our systems into leveraging these outputs. But we are on a path to being able to achieve this kind of AGI-ASI outcome, and we have no way of reasoning how those systems are going to interface with humanity at large or with our economies. And so there's huge questions here. Robotics are around the corner. I already talked about that in a sense, and so I have less than a minute apparently from Zoom, so it's going to close in a moment. So this I already touched on. BCI is very much around the corner. We're going to have, we already have a set of cases, and it's gone. Well, catch my Neurotech talks. I've given a bunch of this information around Neurotech. I'll just speak to it briefly without slides. We already have several companies building devices that can connect brains to do basic motor and sensory repair. We're on the path to get transformative BCI, meaning very large numbers of channels, into humans sometime in the next 2 to 4 years, 2 to 5 years, if you see the papers that are being published now, and you see the devices that people are like announcing in the market. And so that means that you just have a set of clinical trials before that can become much more readily available. So 5 years out from now, you will have significant adoption of critical neurotech devices. One of the most important things that's happening in that space is the decreasing of the experimental cost. There are players in the market that are building technologies to experiment with neurotech, bringing the cost down from like a $50 to $100 million seed round to develop a technology to now $2 to $5, maybe $10 million, which means that suddenly VC can play in that space, which means that now we finally, after many decades, we're finally going to get the repair and augmentation type BCIs. The things after that is as soon as you have VCI of that scale, the first thing we're going to do is connect it to our computers, connect it to our AI models, and connect it to the internet. Now, all of us know how insecure the internet stack is. We just talked about a lot of that. Now, imagine what happens when that is directly connected, not just to a screen that can control you with incentives or access to a ride-sharing platform or tickets on a train, but now it's literally connected to your neurons, right? So first of all, I'm not a decelerationist in that perspective. I see the amazing promise of these kinds of technologies and the benefits for humanity at large that can come from these kinds of techs. So I definitely want them, but I want them to orient towards good outcomes. I want to prevent a range of bad outcomes and orient to the safety of humanity and the safeguarding of our future. By the way, it was very good to hear Vitalik plug DAC Day. A whole bunch of us are coming together in a movement around this where we do want the fruits of science and technology, and we want to bring them closer in time so they can benefit more people. I personally think the slowdown of biotech development has killed hundreds of millions to billions of people, and that is a deep moral failure of our species. And instead, we should be accelerating that technology, but orienting towards good outcomes. So DAC is a movement to be able to selectively accelerate those kinds of technologies faster. And the last one I will plug for you is that BCI is only the opening of the aperture. The thing that's coming behind that is whole brain emulation. I started with that graph. That's not that far away. That's somewhere between 10 to 20 years. That would be my expectation. It could turn out to be 40 or 60, but that's an entire transformation for what it means to be a human and for the fate of our species. And so, please, we need a dramatically better internet underneath the hood to be able to connect it to our brains and connect it to digital humans. And I know that all of that sounds crazy right now. I gave similar talks to similarly incredulous groups when I talked about the AI development 10, 15 years ago. And so I've seen these kind of accelerations happen before. And you'll see that a lot of this neurotech stuff is going to start happening in 2, 5, 10 years. So we have a window of time to put in place a drastically better, much more secure internet infrastructure. And 10 years ago, we had no resources to do that with. And today, we now have $1 trillion to $2 trillion worth of capital that we can now orient exactly towards that. And it's up to us, to the people in this room and the people in these conferences, to do that over the next 2 to 5 years. So hopefully, you'll join in doing that. Thank you.